the body can use whatever fuels are available. And ketones are one of those fuels that should be available, through limited fuel availability, which was a natural state that we have essentially silenced in our modern everyday life.
Central to the ketogenic diet, which I know you're a proponent of, is implied in the name, essentially keto, which refers to the production of ketones. Can we define what ketones are and why are they significant from a metabolic dysfunction standpoint?
The ketogenic diet, that's right, it's the only diet that's defined by an objective biomarker, and that's blood, urine, or breath ketones that can be measured with commercially available devices. And when your body is in a state of ketosis, that means that your metabolism has shifted away from glucose to fatty acid oxidation and ketone production and ketone metabolism, specifically in the brain and in the heart, and in all your peripheral tissues. But the real function of ketosis is really to supply an uninterrupted fuel flow to your brain during periods of starvation or limited carbohydrate availability or just limited food availability. So that's kind of hardwired in us. We can all achieve ketosis, and there are many different ways to do that. And there are really profound therapeutic advantages to being in ketosis for specific applications.
So ketosis and ketogenesis is essentially a survivalist mechanism that evolved down through the eons. Ultimately, most people rely on glucose as a form of fuel, but this is a kind of a default fallback mechanism. Would that be right as far as fuel production is concerned?
Yeah, I would say that it's kind of unnatural for humans not to be in a state of ketosis, given that our early ancestors had limited food availability, limited carbohydrate availability, and their frequency of their meals were not anywhere near of what the standard American has. So they had more metabolic flexibility, and humans have the incredible adaptability to eat pretty much anything. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and there are people who eat purely plant-based diets. There's people who eat only fruit, and there's people who eat only, meat and whale blubber, and they can thrive on these diets. So I'm an advocate of the ketogenic diet for specific therapeutic applications. I actually follow the diet myself, or a modified version of the diet. And I think there's a lot of advantages to doing so, but I don't try to push my nutritional beliefs on anyone. But I can just tell you from experience that some people thrive on it and some people find it very hard to stick to. And that's why, our lab is really focused on making the ketogenic diet easier to follow, inducing therapeutic ketosis with exogenous ketone supplementation, and that could be an advantage for specific things that we study in our lab. And I think ketosis is a natural state. I think there's a question if ketones are the preferred source of energy for the brain, and that always comes up in conversations. And I think it is in specific contexts. And the body can use whatever fuels are available. And ketones are one of those fuels that should be available, through limited fuel availability, which was a natural state that we have essentially silenced in our modern everyday life.
Really interesting, because I spoke with a cardiologist last week who is a proponent of the Paleolithic approach. Basically, he ingests plants and whole foods, meat products, fish products, etc. He engages in intermittent fasting as well. So all of these things harken back to, as you mentioned, how our ancestors would have lived and existed and ingested. They would have gone hours without eating, and they would have had to rely on getting a fuel from whatever source they had access to.
Yeah, that's right. And depending upon their geographical location, the time of the year, whether they're near water, whether they're in the Arctic, whether they're in an equatorial region, that could be their diet could be incredibly diverse. And we have the ability to adapt to eating, that's why we are omnivores, But, even with people who ate a higher carbohydrate diet, they undoubtedly went through periods of limited food availability. So ketosis was even a natural state for people who, lived on a plant-based higher carbohydrate diet. So from my perspective, I got into this field of research because I was studying neuroprotective strategies, in particular to prevent seizures. And then also we gravitated to doing cancer research, and then neurometabolic diseases like inborn errors of metabolism, where many of the things that I just mentioned, especially inborn errors of metabolism, like different enzyme deficiencies or glucose transporter deficiencies, or just going back to epilepsy, drug refractory epilepsy, the ketogenic diet is the standard of care for those disorders when drugs fail. So that caught my interest, and I wanted to understand the mechanisms, the metabolic physiology. As a neuroscientist, I was very interested in the brain and how ketones could be neuroprotective and have anti-seizure effects. So over the last 15 years, that's been the sort of the cornerstone of my research.
Hey, if you enjoyed that video, check out this video here, which tells you how to get rid of that stubborn belly fat.